Mary Magdalene's feast day, July 22nd, happens to fall upon the same day that the constellation Orion returns to the sky. Now, why is this important? Because Orion, according to Rosemary Clark, in ancient Egypt, represented Asar, or more commonly known as Osiris, who is literally the god of resurrection. Now, Mary Magdalene held a very special role in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So, this is just such a fascinating exploration of how current astronomy is really bringing us back into these resurrection mysteries from a new perspective. My name is Nicole, and I've been a student of the resurrection mysteries for basically my whole life as a devout Catholic growing up. I have now been very steeped in Egypt, Sumerian, and Greek mysteries that all have really fascinating takes on the same story. So today we'll be focused mostly on Mary Magdalene and Orion, Ausar, Auset, which is the Christian and Egyptian cosmologies. Now, I only put this together a couple days ago. So to be clear, this is an astronomical phenomenon, right? The heliacal rising of a star is basically when it returns back to the night sky after spending usually 3 to 4 months in a journey with the sun, right? Because when a star is close to the sun, we can't see it because it's out during the daytime and the sun is shining too bright for us to see it. So I did the calculation a while ago for the return of Asar and put it in my calendar. And only last week did I realize that the date that I had put it in for San Francisco is July 22nd, which is Mary Magdalene's feast day. And wow. So the heliacal rising, as I mentioned, will shift depending on where you are in the world. It's different for every latitude. Typically, the higher you are, the later that it is. And this would be a northern hemisphere situation. First, let's talk about Mary Magdalene's feast day, right? So her feast day is on July 22nd. And the most likely reason that it would be on July 22nd is because that's most likely the day that she died, right? The day that she passed from her human life. That is how most saints get their feast days. So it wouldn't have necessarily been because of this astronomical alignment. That could be a coincidence, maybe? Mary Magdalene didn't actually receive a feast day until June of 2016 when Pope Francis elevated her to the status of saint, moving this day from a memorial day to an actual feast day. So it's been almost 10 years that Mary Magdalene has had her own actual feast day. Mary Magdalene was a very important part of Jesus Christ's resurrection, right? She went to the tomb to perform the death rites and was the first to discover that his body was gone. And she was weeping outside of the tomb, according to John 20, when she saw someone. She thought it was the gardener. And when he said her name, Mary, she realized that it was Jesus. And the first thing he says to her is not to touch him. He says, "Do not cling to me yet, for I have not yet ascended." Right? So, like, for him to say that to her means that he knew that her first instinct would be to cling to him. And I'm sure that would have been anyone's first instinct if they saw someone that they loved who had passed turn up again. I do think that that's very interesting, though. And so Mary Magdalene was unable to touch Jesus Christ because of the state of his resurrection. It would have been dangerous for her. However, Jesus did tell her to go tell all of the rest of the apostles and basically deliver the most important message in Christianity ever, right? That Jesus Christ, Lord and Savior, is resurrected. So Asar, which is the Kemetic term for Osiris. Osiris is the Greek name. Asar is the Kemetic name. Kemetic is basically what Egypt, Kemet is what Egypt was called back in the time of ancient Egypt. And Kemet means black fertile soil, right? Because that is why Egypt was the cradle of civilization that it was because of the black fertile soil that came from the silt of the Nile, flooding that gave them an abundance of crops and allowed them to grow so rich. So the Kemetic name is Asar. The more common name is Osiris. You will hear me use both interchangeably, but I'm going to try to use the Kemetic names as much as possible. Now, Asar, as I mentioned, is the god of resurrection. And so his story is a little bit different than Jesus Christ. Asar gets in a fight with his brother Set, where Set kills him and dismembers him and basically cuts his body into 14 different pieces that he spreads across the Nile. And when Auset, who is Isis, Auset, Kemetic, Isis is actually the Greek name. Auset, obviously, as his wife, is really upset about this. And so her and her sister Nebatet go and they collect all of the different 14 pieces. They bring them back together and they perform a rite to basically bring him back and resurrect him. So this is one of the oldest stories of resurrection that we have. It's still not actually the oldest, but it is a very old story. It's thousands of years older than the story of Jesus Christ. And what's interesting is through this story of resurrection, Auset is actually able to find his phallus and impregnate herself, and they have a child, Heru. And so I do think that is just sort of an interesting part of it. Either way, Ausar is the god of resurrection. The time that he, as the constellation Orion, spends near the sun, it's about 3 to 4 months. That's the time that the ancient Egyptians said that he was in his descent journey in the underworld. And so his heliacal rising, which is happening right now, would be the return of Ausar and the return of his resurrection, his return from the underworld. And so that's happening the same day as Mary Magdalene's feast day. The first person to see Jesus Christ resurrect. A lot of you may be familiar with the Sirius portal, the Lion's Gate portal, which is the heliacal rising of Sirius, which will happen in about 2 weeks. It's going to happen pretty much on August 8th here in San Francisco. Again, it will change a little bit depending on your latitude here on Earth. But that was a very important time in ancient Egypt because the rising of Sirius coincided with the flooding of the Nile, which is what brought all of their abundance and basically brought all of their sustenance and their whole ability to even survive in that climate. And Sirius was also represented as Auset in ancient Egypt, who was the one who resurrected Ausar. So in that story, it was a female deity that resurrected a male deity. However, there are traditions that place Mary Magdalene in the lineage of the priestesses of Auset or Isis. So in that lineage, Mary Magdalene would have been taught some of these resurrection mysteries. She would have been taught of this lineage. And so it's really fascinating to consider the correlation between this Egyptian resurrection story and this Christian resurrection story and the timing astronomically of Mary Magdalene's feast day with the actual astronomical events that ancient Egyptians were revering quite closely. The rising of Sirius was literally their new year. Like they based their entire calendar around it because of the significance of the Nile flooding was obviously super important. A lot of Christianity has placed Mary Magdalene as a follower of Jesus. A lot of people say she was a prostitute. Many scholars of Christianity and of Jesus Christ believe that Mary Magdalene was more than just a follower of Jesus Christ. They believe that she was actually an apostle of Jesus Christ. It's been found that Mary Magdalene even had her own gospel that wasn't included in the original biblical canon. However, it is a Gnostic text that has been found and translated. And in that text, it shows that Mary Magdalene was able to really process and understand a lot of complex spiritual lessons that Jesus was teaching to her and the other apostles. The fact that Jesus Christ revealed himself to her first upon his resurrection is a very clear and obvious sign of the depth of their bond and of how close she was to him. So we have Mary Magdalene, the witness to Jesus Christ's resurrection, being honored on the same day that astronomical Ausar is returning to the sky in his resurrection. Like, is this a coincidence? What do you think? Like, what do you think any of this means? I would be really curious. Like, does this reveal something deeper about how these resurrection mysteries have been translated over time and how they've been given to us over time? If this is something that you're interested in, this fall I will be going a lot deeper into these mysteries as well as even older ones. And also, if the Lion's Gate portal and the rising of Sirius is something that you're interested, I'm going to have a series on that starting early next week. So please give me a follow if you would like any more updates here.